everyone, welcome to another episode of the Daily Wisdom Words podcast, where each week we talk to folks who have stories, advice, and life hacks, all of which take you one step closer to that feeling of hope. I'm your co-host, Neil Trivedi.
And I'm your co-host, Rini O'Day.
And today we have the pleasure of being joined by one of the most recognized authorities on covert emotional incest. We have Adena Bank-Lees. Hi, Adena. Welcome to our show.
Hi,
Thanks,
Adena.
Neil. Hi, Rini. Welcome.
It's such
Thanks,
a pleasure
everybody.
to have you on.
Same
It
here.
really
Pleasure
is.
to be
And,
with you.
Usually we list off our guests' accomplishments and their background and all that. But when we're looking into yours, you have so many. So can you tell a little bit about the audience about your distinctions and what you studied over the years and how you came to do what you do today?
Absolutely. So, again, I always say my name again. I was taught by my dad that you always introduce yourself before you start anything. So my name is Adena Bank-Lees. I am a licensed clinical social worker here in the state of Arizona. I'm also a licensed substance abuse counselor here. I have a board certification from the American Academy of Experts in Traumatic Stress for working with traumatic stress. I'm also a fellow of that organization. And I have a certification in a modality of therapy that I've studied since 1989 called psychodrama. And that is the main modality that I utilize now in helping people. I'm very eclectic and I use a lot, and I've combined many. I have a model that is in the process of being registered, trademarked right now, called ABL, Trauma Responsive Psychodrama. Because my model goes way beyond just trauma-informed care. That's like the big thing now. Being trauma-informed so trauma-responsive means we go beyond just being informed. We are with the person really responding to what their needs are and really being keen on checking in with what their needs are. Yes.
And what are you concentrating most on with your clients?
So my specialty areas, Rini, are childhood sexual abuse, covert emotional incest in particular, and addictions. That's my background. That's what I've studied. That's what I started training in 33 years ago. And right now,
you look 33. How is that possible?
Thank you. The screen does a very good job. The screen does a very good job. Yes, it photoshops automatically.
So kudos to you, because I can't even imagine doing it myself. But like, to have people like you helping others, bravo.
Makes a huge difference.
Thank you. I'm very clear, and I got real clear that this is my purpose here on earth at this time around, if there is a this time around, is to be of service. And how can I be of service? And I happen to, it just fit for me to be able to do psychotherapy. And then when I found psychodrama in 1988, I said, this is me. This is how I can give my gift and how I can be of service to people.
Can you explain what psychodrama is?
Absolutely. So psychodrama, psyche is soul, drama equals action. So it's the stories of the soul in action. So psychodrama is an experiential modality that's used for psychotherapy, for education, for training. They use it to train FBI and CIA agents. They use it for medical training. And it's worldwide. And it's more popular and utilized in other areas of the world than even it is in the United States, which is really interesting. And it was founded, I'll say just this, it was founded by Dr. Jacob Moreno, who was a neurologist and psychiatrist in Vienna in the early 1900s. And what he did was, he was in the Freud era where people lied on the couch and just talked, and the therapist was a blank slate and just sat with a pen and a pad. And he said, this is BS, this is total BS, this does not work. And he was watching children play in the parks in Vienna. And he said, that's what my patients need. They're so stuck. They have very rigid thinking. They're stuck in old behaviors. They need to play like children play. The spontaneity and the creativity of children is what is lost when there's mental illness. And so, and we would call it today traumatic stress. They didn't call it that then, but that's how traumatic stress impacts us. So his model is based all on encouraging, enhancing spontaneity and creativity. And that's why it's just so beautiful. People think about it. This is mainly the work I'm doing now, doing in residential drug and alcohol trauma treatment centers here in Tucson. I'm running psychodrama groups. And people come in, we talked about misconceptions of CEI. People have many misconceptions of psychodrama because they hear it and they go, psychodrama? I have enough psychodrama in my own life, right? Psychodrama, like I have enough of that. So they get scared. I have to act. You're going to make me role play. You're going to make, and ABL trauma responsive psychodrama is not making anyone do anything. It's about choice. It's not about role playing necessarily. We do that in psychodrama. We practice new behavior. That is what it is. So just very simply, and people are blown away by something that is very simple, yet very powerful. Because when we go out of our intellect, our prefrontal cortex, our thinking, and we get into our bodies, which psychodrama is a somatic modality, and we get into the limbic system and the brain stem, which don't have any words, we are doing a level of healing that we can't do if we just stay here. Neil and Rini, we know now through the explosion of brain research in the 90s, they called it the decade of the brain, between 1990 and 2000, that trauma is processed and stored in the levels of the brain that don't have words. And so if we do not access those, we do not do trauma work. We don't. So you can alleviate symptoms, but you don't do the healing and the reprocessing that needs to happen. So there are many modalities that have come out from the late 80s, 90s because of the brain research that all look at that and attack that and help to calm the nervous system so that people can do what they need to do in their lives.
Yeah,
that is fascinating.
It's like you don't want to be putting a Band-Aid on, right? It's basically, putting a Band-Aid on would be covering up something, but not really looking at, okay, but why do I have this wound in the first place? What happened? And that's what it is, like getting to the root cause of the whatever is triggering you.
Exactly.
What do I always say, Neil? What do I always say? Everybody needs therapy. I mean, we all you know,
at some point, right? At some point for some time of our lives.
And I guess to give just a brief context to our audience is some of the things when we were discussing the direction of what to talk about in this episode, you and I, we talked over email. And one thing I found fascinating was the lack of information statistically available on one of your main focus, covert emotional incest. And that just shocked me. So let's get into that. First, can you explain exactly what that is?
Absolutely. So I'm going to, as I said to you earlier, I'm going to read from my book, Covert Emotional Incest, the definition, and I want to stop and explain some things as we're going on. Okay.
Please.
All right. So CEI, just for purposes, right, abbreviated, is an elusive, emotional form of sexual abuse that occurs in the family system without there necessarily being direct genital contact. So with talking about sexual abuse, we have to say, well, when people think about that, what is that? So when we talk about sexual abuse, we usually think about physical sexual abuse, where a young child, assault would be more of an adult, right? But if we talk about sexual abuse, a young child who is touched physically, their body is violated by touch with either, by objects, human being, hands, whatever. That's what we think of. So this is an emotional form, and it goes to your question, Neil, about why aren't there stats? Why isn't this more talked about? Why isn't this more validated, I would say, validated in the mental health community? And it's not because of the fact that it is elusive, that most people don't know that it even exists. We think about it in these kinds of ways, and that's why I do what I do. We think about it as, wow, he's a little boy, but he stepped up when his dad died. He's now the man of the house, and he's taking care of his mom and his sisters. Be proud of him. So there's a cultural, societal view of that really elevates it and how great it is. And yet what happens to that boy, and where's his childhood? And what does taking care of his mother mean? His job is not to take care of his mother's emotional needs. His job is not to take care of his younger siblings. His job is to be a kid. And the adult's job is to take care of their emotional needs with other adults, professionals, etc. Correct?
Right.
Right. And so
Yes.
because of that, there's a denial, there's a justifying, and so people don't see it.
Right.
And they don't think there's anything wrong with it. And that's how a lot of the patients come, or clients come thinking, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong here. Or it's codependency. We've heard that word for years. So, my mother's codependent on me. So she tells me a lot of things and she relies on me. And what I would be asking in an interview are the kinds of things that are being told and the kind of relying that happens, because in covert emotional incest, the child is used as a surrogate or substitute spouse for one or both of the parents. So I usually give the example, from my own life, which is what brought me to do this. When you asked, what got you into this? Well, I was a therapist since I was 3, and I'm like kidding and not kidding. Yeah. And my job in my role one of my roles in the family was to be the confidant and substitute spouse for my mom and my dad. So what that means is I was told personal, intimate things about their relationship and complaints about the other. And I was told, I feel so much better when I talk to you. You listen in a way your mom, your dad doesn't listen. These are classic pieces of covert emotional incest. And some people can say, well, that's called parentification, because there's a term in family therapy called parentification. A child is elevated, made a parent kind of figure. And we know it happens a lot in very large families. It happens in addicted family systems. It happens when a parent dies, what we were talking about before. So what's the difference between parentification and CEI? And what I would say to that is that there's the sexual energy that goes with that role that the child picks up on, that child doesn't know how to make sense of, but picks up on it and then that impacts the way that they do relationships, see their life, their world, etc. And so, for example, when I was in my late teens and my dad and I were out for lunch or dinner or something together, and people would come up to the table and they would say, oh, is it, the waitress, is this your wife? And we would laugh, and we thought that was so funny and was so cute. I looked older, and really what people were picking up on was the energy between my dad and I that was more like lovers than it was like father and daughter. I don't know how to explain it more than that. But people, when I talk about it, they go, oh my goodness, I get you. That's what happened. That's what I was feeling. I always felt like I was having an affair with my father or my mother, because it doesn't matter about gender, okay? And the other piece, and I've talked about this a lot, with some of the way parents are raising kids today, and I'm not being judgmental, I'm trying to point things out. Moms want to be best friends, BFFs with their daughters. And they dress alike and they go to parties and, no, 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 no. We need to stay in the adult role, the parent role, which is, a one-up. It's kind of, there's a power differential. I make the decisions. You're still the child, right? You have a voice in the family. Absolutely. We want to hear you. We still make the main decisions in the family. And that's getting skewed a lot, and role confusion can happen. And so, what's going on here? So I'll stop there. There's more to say, but I just wanted to see if either of you had comments or how you wanted to respond to that.
Well, did you feel shame? Did you feel shame at all? Not knowing what. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. Did I feel shame about
like when the waitress would ask, "Oh, are you, husband and wife?" Later, did you kind of feel like, that's kind of like wrong?
Well, I felt it in the moment, but the defense was to laugh. But the pit of my stomach went, ugh.
Okay, like, so it was there, but you didn't know at that time.
Exactly. Yeah. I had no words for it. I had no concept for it, Rini. Absolutely. And I remember saying to my therapist, who gave me this term back when I was in my mid-20s, when I talked about it, I said, I feel like I've been having an affair with my dad. But he never touched me. Like, there was never sexual abuse. So how could I feel like that and have all the signs and symptoms of someone who'd been sexually abused when it never happened to me? And when she found out about the dynamics in my family, she goes, okay, so have you ever heard the term? This is what's going on.
Yeah. Wow.
You mentioned and this is something interesting. You mentioned the one problem that you see with today's parenting, and of course the other extreme which you just talked about, your experience and so many others, right? So where is that healthy balance of, parenting and children? Like, where does that, what should you do as a parent or not do in those, if there are things that parents should, like, okay, is there a definitive list of things, or does it matter from home to home or environment to environment? What is the raising process that would be ideal to avoid that, but also avoid the other extreme that you talked about just a second ago, about that modern of somebody's got to set the rules, no matter how healthy the relationship is, right, between a child and a parent?
What's the guidelines, kind of general guidelines, Neil, would be for parents to get guidance, go to professionals for guidance about how do I best parent this infant, this toddler, and there are two people that I want to just recommend right off the bat. If your listeners are readers, it's audiobook, it's regular book, whatever. And one is Dr. Daniel J. Siegel. And Dr. Daniel J. Siegel writes a lot. He's the developer of what's called interpersonal neurobiology. And he writes with authors about parenting and how as the adults, our unresolved trauma impacts our parenting and then can pass down fears, etc., to our children, and how to avoid that. And the main piece is do your own work. Get in your own therapy and do your own work. So, for example, there's a client that I was working with this past week who said, I came into residential treatment because my son, and I remember the age, I think it was 5 or 6, my son is now at the age I was when I had been abused. Now, she had some pretty significant physical, sexual abuse. And she said, and all my feelings and all my memories are starting to come up. And I don't want to do that. Not that she would abuse him, but I don't want to be not present. I don't want to have all this coming up and try to be a parent. So she knew she needed help. And that is very common. It happened for me when my son reached 9. There was stuff that came up for me I did not expect. And my son even said to me, Mom, as I was reacting to something that was happening at school. And he said, Mom, I'm not you. I don't feel that way. And I went, oh, okay.
Wow.
Like, I need to, so of course I went to my therapist and I talked about that and got that awareness. So one thing is to be open to get guidelines. Another author, and this book just recently came out in the last year or so. I love it. And it is called What Happened to You? And it's a conversation between Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Bruce Perry, who's one of my heroes. Dr. Bruce Perry is a neuroscientist and child psychiatrist. And they've been working together for 30 plus years. And it's the conversation about what happens in the developing brain in utero with a mom's stress levels, etc. How is the brain impacted? 0 to 4, 0 to 2 really is like the mainstay of when brains develop for healthy attachment, being able to trust the world. Is the world a safe enough place? Will my needs get met? And so if I'm a parent who is shut down, if I haven't done my own work and I'm too anxious or I'm depressed, I am not going to be able to bond with that baby and meet their needs in a way that they can feel like there's a safe enough world and that brain can develop appropriately. I know for me, I slept on the floor in my son's room for a long time, and I thought, is this ever going to change? But he needed me to be there with his stuffed animals all over his bed to feel safe. And he needed me, and this is what we're getting, is the kids need us as the adults to help them learn how to calm themselves. Professional term is regulate your nervous system. So calm yourself so you're not too anxious or you're not too depressed. I can think and feel at the same time. That's how I describe that. And so when I was in my son's room, he was able to fall asleep within minutes. So he felt okay. He was calm. He could go to sleep. Fine. Like, what is that skin off my back? No, that's my job. And if I can regulate me, and I remember this, he was, I don't know, 1.5 or 2, and I was crying about something. And he came over, as little kids do, he came over and gave me a hug, and, your heart just melts when that happens. And I said, honey, thank you so much. I said, Mommy is sad. So I named the feeling. Mommy is sad. She's crying. And you are not responsible for my feelings. I am. I'm taking care of it. And thank you for the hug. I love you. Now, at 1.5 years, you would say, he doesn't understand what you're saying. Probably not. But the energy I gave and the words continued as he got older was, I can take care of my feelings. I named the feelings, so he has a feelings language. And you talk about what are the instructions. Feelings language, yes. Boundaries. Like, it's my body. So, go give Aunt Jan a hug. Well, I don't want to give her, no, go over and give her a hug. No. It's a little one at 1.5, my son was able to say to my mom, no, Nanny, it's my body. Because he didn't want to hug his grandmother. She was coming over to him. He didn't want to at that moment. And he was able to say no because I taught him. Because it was okay to say no. Because I grew up, it wasn't okay to say no. And I wanted that to be different. Right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
So those are just highlights of things, that kids have a say, they have a voice. They don't run the show. They have a voice. They have a voice to be able to say no about their bodies. Anytime, any place, no is no. That we teach them a feelings language, that we take care of our own feelings. It's not their job to soothe us. It's our job to soothe them. We do make house rules. There are boundaries. Kids need that for safety. You don't have any limits or boundaries. They don't feel safe. And our job is to help them feel safe so that they can literally imprint it into their brain, that they take us and they take that safety with them so they can go to school. Otherwise, oh my God, that's too, I can't go. I have to be with mom. I have to be in the safe place. No, they have enough inside of them that they can go, which is 0 to 4, in utero to 4. That's like the main, most important time.
Well, I've always been a proponent of teaching, starting in kindergarten, teaching children how to breathe, how to calm themselves.
Well, that's what we're talking about, Rini, is it teaches them to regulate their nervous system, that they have the skill, which means I don't have to necessarily go out and use drugs and alcohol to regulate my nervous system, because that's what that does. I don't necessarily have to abuse video games to regulate my nervous system. Anything that's outside, food, exercise, I mean, because we can be compulsive with any of this. In my own history, one of the pieces I used to regulate my system was restricting and starving myself. So we can go from that end to binging and purging to, overuse of drugs, alcohol, etc. Because that's what it's about. It's about trying to get into that zone that I feel okay.
What are some of the most common symptoms you've seen, like from people who have experienced CEI? How has it come out? I know earlier you mentioned maybe it comes out in their own relationships and those don't go right. But what are some of the most common symptoms? Because so much, like you mentioned earlier, gets talked about with its sexual trauma, and when there's physical sexual trauma, there's so much out there. Oh, anxiety and this caused this and this, but we still don't know so much about CEI. So what are some of the long-term effects you've seen in people when they've been through that, especially in their adult years?
That's a great question. So thank you for that question. I would say the number one is I deny my needs. My focus is all on you and what you need. Because that was the role training. The focus was not on my needs as a kid. It was on me taking care of you. So the caretaker role, the caretaking behavior is like numero uno. And so I see it's interesting, I see a lot of nurses, teachers, professionals in the roles of taking care of that have this kind of history. So that's number one. And then a lot of very similar signs and symptoms to people who've been physically, sexually abused. So there's hypersexuality, and there can be that I sexualize intimacy, which means, I don't know how to do the emotional form very well, but I make it sexual and physically sexual. And it could be all the way again to the extreme, because when we have trauma, we often go to extremes, and that's what happens. We don't know the balance. And so we go from hypersexuality, maybe promiscuity, to what we call sexual anorexia, which is the shutdown of sexual feelings and behaviors. And it's been very interesting now with people who are identifying as asexual. I've gotten comments about this saying, you're pathologizing it. I'm just claiming I'm asexual. That's part of my sexual identity. And so I am not saying to anybody, I'm not telling anyone they have a trauma history. No, it's not my job. Okay. What I'm saying is that that can be the people I've worked with clinically who have shut down sexually. It most of the time has related to CEI, physical sexual abuse, seeing domestic violence used in the home, that people have seen their mothers raped. I mean, it happens. And so why would their system want to go anywhere near there?
Yeah.
And how vulnerable do you need to be? When you're sexual, hopefully we are very vulnerable. When people are using drugs and alcohol, you're in an altered state. But when you talk about having sex sober, it's quite a different experience. And when you talk about having open-eyed sex, you're talking about an even more intimate experience. And so it can be so scary that people just shut down and avoid. So it's an avoidant technique. So CEI, again, getting back to your question, Neil. So caretaker role, mediator, being a mediator, big time, because that's what we were taught. And then having these issues around sexuality and around sexual boundaries. Now we get depression, we get anxiety, we get PTSD symptoms, even though there hasn't been physical sexual abuse. But it's also CEI can set people up to be sexually abused, assaulted, because they're not sure of what the boundaries are. Like, how can I say this? All right, so I'll give you another example from my own life. So at 10, I was hanging out with one of my brother's friends who was 16. What the hell am I doing with a 16-year-old? And what is he doing with a 10-year-old girl? Right? So because I'm more mature. When you're a victim of CEI, you're so mature for your age. You can handle so much. So you believe it. And you say, and I said, I'm special. I always was told that. Well, yeah, I'm special. So, I can handle this 16-year-old. This is who I should be hanging out with. And then there were things that happened that I felt very special because I was told I was special. And some stuff that happened sexually that felt good and it felt yucky at the same time. And I was scared at the same time. And I felt embarrassed at the same time. I had no words for it. I didn't know what to do. I froze. But I thought that was supposed to be. Like, I didn't know any different. And I continued to go back because I thought that was what was supposed to happen. And there was a special feeling that I got from it, which is not appropriate, right?
Right.
But that, and I had to do a lot of work to kind of undo that piece. Yeah. So that's another thing.
With the boy, it doesn't it like something happened to him, right? It had to.
That's the story I make up.
Doesn't sexual abuse, like grandfather, father, son, or whatever? It's pretty much, yeah.
It can be in multi-generational, Rini. What I don't want the message to be is, if you've been sexually abused, you're going to sexually abuse somebody, because that's not true.
No. No.
The stats on that, Neil likes stats, right? So stats on that are about 26% of people who've been physically sexually abused, because that's who they have the stats for. And the reason, and thank you for saying this, because it gets me, Child Protective Services is where you get most of the statistics from child abuse. The reported cases to state child protective service agencies. If you reported CEI to a child protective service agency, they would laugh at you. Okay.
Yeah.
And
really,
we have no evidence.
Well, because if a kid calls up a cop and says, I feel this, and they'll be like, okay, where did this person touch you? Well, they didn't touch me. Well, then what's wrong? Well, I'm feeling this way. And they'll be like, what? Well, so what? Who cares? And poof. Right?
Yeah, or I can't do anything about it. There's no evidence. I mean, if you say somebody's threatened to kill me, we can't do anything until they've done something.
They kill you, yeah.
So they kill you,
then
right?
It's too late.
So that's one of the big reasons. Also, we'll go back to the first question: why isn't there research? Because we don't have reported cases to CPS, and what we know is that physical sexual abuse is so underreported that our statistics are 1 in 4 girls before she's 18 and 1 in 5 boys before he's 18. And that's based on reported cases.
Reported. Exactly. That's the key word there.
How many cases go unreported? So those numbers are higher. So it's very prevalent. It's very prevalent. And Rini, going back to what you said about this 16-year-old, I make up the story that whatever was going on, whether he was physically sexually abused or not, or I don't know. I make up a story. It's possible, because you're right. It does go generation to generation. It can. That's why I was so dedicated to stop the cycle with me. And also what we know, unfortunately, males in our Western society here and many other societies, men have the power.
Yeah.
Men are taught they have the power. Men are taught that women are their objects and their possessions, and that they can do what they want to them. The issue is the age. So if you have, again, a 16-year-old, what is the 16-year-old doing with a 10-year-old? we're talking about a prepubescent child. So then we can start talking about, was this guy a pedophile? Pedophile is, I get sexually turned on gratification from a prepubescent child. That is my, I hate to say it, like my sexual orientation. You know, that's where my sexual arousal comes from. It's, you know, we call it pederasty if it's adolescence. And so right now, we don't have a way to change that, to fix that. And so the only thing that we do with people who are pedophiles is we put them in jail, and we have behavioral treatment for them, which is, we know those are your impulses. You learn ways to not act out and act on them. But we don't have a way to get into their brain right now and change that to be sexually aroused to adults. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
It's like, we're getting into all kinds of topics here.
Well, no, they might stop because of the therapy and the rehab. They might stop, like, okay, I'm not supposed to touch a minor or go after a minor because that's the law, but it doesn't change the way they feel. Right, that's what you're getting at. It may not change. They may still be attracted, which is what we're not. Again, going back to the root cause of, well, why are you attracted in the first place, though? What is making you right? So that's what it goes by. It's there's a difference between not doing something because if I do, I'll get in trouble again, versus why do I want to do this in the first place, right?
Yeah, we need to fix their brain.
Right, and I wish that we knew how to do that. We still don't. And you could say, you know, how many of these people did sexual abuse make them a pedophile? There's something biological that we know is happening, and there's a lot of research going on to try to find out about what that is, because of the detriment to society, because of, you know, we don't want people hurting kids, and we don't want the prison system, you know. So there is research going on, but right now, no, we do not have a way. Just like we don't have a way, if someone doesn't have a conscience, we would call them antisocial, or we'd call them a psychopath. You know, they don't have a conscience, which means they don't have guilt about what they do wrong.
Empathy,
They can't empathize. We don't have a way to put a conscience into someone at this point. If we did, that'd be great.
Yeah.
There's empathy training, and we do that in psychodrama in certain ways. But if you don't have it right now, you don't have it.